My fiance James and I were desperate for deep isolation for our late October trip to the Appalachian Trail. We planned for the 28th, a date close enough to Halloween to feel eerie, but late enough that the trails would be deserted. The ranger at the desk confirmed our spot, Raven's Bluff, with an unsettling flat tone, reminding us it was the last weekend before the whole section was strictly shut down for the season. We loved the crisp, biting cold of the mountain air, but by the time the moon completely failed to penetrate the thick canopy that night, the air didn't just feel cold, it felt hostile and heavy, carrying a damp, earthy odour of decay and something indefinable, metallic. We knew we were utterly alone, miles from the nearest signal or human sound. Around 1 AM, bundled tight in our 0-degree sleeping bags, the absolute silence outside was suddenly, violently shattered. It was a rapid, rhythmic thud, 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 like a seasoned runner sprinting full speed on the hard-packed earth, circling our small dome tent in the absolute lightless dark. This was no clumsy animal gallop, it was fast, two-legged, and unnervously consistent, sending sharp tremors through the thin ground beneath us. It sounded practiced, mechanical, and frantic all at once. It circled us twice, the sound dissolving the last vestiges of our civilized composure. James finally found his voice and yelled, "Who's out there? Get lost!" The running stopped instantly, not gradual, but as if the sound itself had been physically cut. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick, with the sound of our own ragged, panicked breathing. After 5 agonizing minutes of stillness, the sound returned. A guttural, distorted imitation of James's own voice called out from 50 feet away. "Where are you? I'm alone." The voice was sickeningly wrong. It was too deep, too slow, and had a wet, scraping texture, like rough, cold leather being pulled over damp stone. Whatever was out there was clearly trying to articulate human words but failing on a fundamental, physical level. Unable to process the emotion or the cadence of speech, we huddled, unable to move, realizing the nylon walls were the only barrier between us and this intelligent, malignant thing that knew our names. The terror peaked when the creature began to work. A new sound, a low, deliberate scratching, started just outside the tent flap, right at the zipper level. It wasn't claws, it was the precise, surgical sound of a sharp tool gently testing the durable nylon, checking for weaknesses. James choked out a single word. "It's testing the zipper." The scratching stopped, replaced by a gentle, sustained pressure on the mosquito netting near the floor. I watched, horrified, as a small, clear tear appeared in the mesh. Pressed against the opening was a single, smooth, unnatural pale finger, longer, whiter, and thinner than any human finger I've ever seen, wiggling the tear wider. Its movement was slow, deliberate, and entirely calculating, checking the strength of the final layer of fabric before our faces. That was the breaking point. We moved faster than we thought possible, abandoning everything but the necessities as we scrambled for the truck. The cold engine screamed to life, drowning out the hideous silence as we sped down the dark, single-lane logging road. The horrifying climax unfolded. Just 300 feet from the main paved road, the primitive trail was completely blocked by a thick, hastily built wall of freshly snapped, thorny briars and heavy brush. It was massive, impenetrable entanglement that must have been built in a brief period of silence after the scratching stopped. Whatever was out there had physically sealed our only escape route, knowing exactly how long it would take us to flee. The park manager, he later told us that Raven's Bluff was permanently shut down for maintenance, but we knew the truth. The trail had been closed by a terrifying, calculating predator that didn't want its seasonal prey to leave its hunting ground. The history of the mountains set the chilling tone for our late October climb. We were on a high, remote ridge known for strange acoustics, but also known as the exact place two seasoned hikers had vanished years ago. Their bodies never recovered after being caught in a sudden, disorientating fog. My partner Chris and I set up camp on a small exposed plateau, the air heavy with deep pine and the chill of impending snowfall. We were the last permit holders on the ridge, but even before the sun fully set, the mountain began to speak, a low, rhythmic whistling that seemed to move up and down the valley walls, warping and shifting with the air currents. It wasn't the wind, it was too precise, too musical, repeating the same four-note phase over and over, like a broken, lonely tune. The very same sound detailed in the missing hiker's last radio logs. We dismissed it as old acoustic phenomenon caused by the ridge structure, but it kept us awake for hours. The whistling would grow quiet when we talked, only to return louder and more insistent the moment we fell silent, making the tent feel like a drum. The true terror began around 3 a.m, when a thick, unnatural pea-soup fog rolled in hours faster than predicted, completely trapping us. This fog was unlike natural mountain weather. It was dense, smelled faintly of ozone, and swallowed all the light. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet, and the rhythmic whistling suddenly stopped, replaced by an absolute, suffocating silence that pressed against our eardrums. Chris grabbed our two-way radio to contact the distant park office, but all we heard was a deafening rush of static, as if a hand had been clamped over the receiving antennae. Then, melodic whistling returned, now clearly coming directly from the radio speakers, as if something intelligent was manipulating the frequency itself and broadcasting its malignant tune straight into our tent. We scrambled out, panic-stricken. Chris was shining his flashlight around frantically, and that's when I saw it, the horrifying payoff of the whistling. In the dim, choked beam of the flashlight, I realized we had placed our small dome tent precisely on the very edge of a deep, sheer cliff face. The ground beneath the tent was loose, dark soil actively crumbling from the moisture, and the rhythmic whistling now seemed to be coming from below the edge, echoing up the terrifying vertical drop. The two previous missing hikers hadn't gotten lost. They had been lured by the mountain's voice to this exact spot. We were moments from pitching ourselves into the void by simply shifting our weight inside the tent. We crawled back inside, paralyzed, knowing any movement might be our last. Suddenly, the whistling stopped and the radio static cleared. A cold, perfectly calm female voice cut through the air, saying, "You really shouldn't camp so close to the path. It's too late now." The voice was immediately followed by a sound, the distinct, wet snap of a human neck breaking, broadcast directly into our tent with unnerving clarity. We ran, we fled down the ridge through the absolute swirling white of the fog, scrambling over rocks and roots in a blind panic. We made it out, injured and traumatized, but alive. The park service later stated that that section of the ridge was closed permanently due to unforeseen geological instability. But we knew the truth. The instability was not geological, it was the mountain itself, using the seasonal fog as a shroud to claim its final, horrific victims before the winter snow locked everything away, ensuring the mountain's voice only beckons in the dead of the fall. The moment my friends Lisa, Tom and I pulled up to Site 14 for our final late October camping trip, the atmosphere felt aggressively wrong. The official closing date was 2 days away, a fact the entry sign seemed to aggressively convey. The site looked less like a campsite and more like a desecrated crime scene. The ground was excessively scoured, raked back to bare earth in places. The old pine picnic table unnaturally scarred with deep, haphazard knife cuts, and despite our best efforts to air out the space, a persistent, faint, sweet smell, like burnt sugar or incense, lingered in the heavy, cold air. It felt less like recreation and more like we were trespassing on recently used, hostile ground. Most unsettlingly, there was a total lack of animal life. The usual late-season squirrels, birds and even insects were utterly absent. The first night was unnerving but uneventful. We kept checking the shadows, expecting pranksters, but saw only the moonless darkness. The second morning, however, Lisa returned from foraging looking violently sick, clutching her chest and pointing wordlessly back towards the woods. We followed her, our breath clouding in the sharp air, 50 feet from our tent to the massive, knotted roots of a dead oak tree. Built in a shallow depression was a crude, circular structure, barely visible under a layer of damp pine needles. It was filled with what looked intentionally like small, white pebbles bleached by the elements. When Tom carefully brushed the leaves away, the truth hit us with a physical sickness. These weren't pebbles. They were hundreds of human baby teeth. Smoothed and yellowed with age, meticulously organized in tight, dizzying concentrated circles. This wasn't ancient history. The teeth had been carefully placed, not scattered, and the surrounding leaves felt too damp, too fresh. It was clearly a ritualistic offering, and we had stumbled upon it, the reason the site was closing. We immediately decided to abandon camp. While Lisa scrambled to tear down the tent, Tom and I rushed to secure our food, knowing we couldn't trust anything. That's when we discovered the second, more immediate violation. Our large metal cooler, secured with a thick bungee cord, had been unlatched. Every single can of preserved foods, beans, soup, tuna, had been punctured with a clean, sharp circular hole near the bottom and completely drained. Not ripped or clawed open by an animal, but deliberately, surgically contaminated. The perpetrator wasn't hungry. They were fouling our supplies and making a deliberate, sadistic statement about our vulnerability. The only items left completely untouched were the 2 large cans of black coffee. The final, horrifying discovery was the chilling, personalized tally, resting neatly on the scarred picnic table, exactly where our lantern had sat, was a small, carefully arranged stack of 12 smooth, black river stones. 12. A cold, meticulous count. We realized the number corresponded precisely to the amount of people who had been on the site's roster for the entire month of October, including the 3 of us. We hadn't just stumbled upon a scene. We were the final subjects being counted before the cycle reset. We fled, leaving nearly all our gear behind. The park manager later confirmed that Site 14 was the first to be permanently roped off every fall, citing unforeseen ground contamination, specifically mentioning the toxic ash residue that they couldn't identify. We knew the contamination wasn't chemical. It was a deep, ritualistic sickness that closed the park for good, ensuring the seasonal offering could continue undisturbed into the following spring.